destination. Darkness is quite near your feet and sunsets through your ears. And tide is rising, drought is non-existent. Sins are washed away, all the faults that you were facing. Sunset chaser, where's your new location? Searching for a purpose, the truth is making you nervous. And sunlight's waiting, there's a happy ending. Picture perfect skies, does your life have any meaning? Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you. Daylight saver till the next adventure. Love is all around, but you're focused on your frowning. Rays are burning, achy luminescence, feeling through the gloom, tense and patient for its blooming. Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Sunny sea, there's no point of being me, as the night took my innocence. I'm starting to see there's no mention of happiness. Life I possess, I offer it to you as you banish regret. In my heart, tape mouth, I can't hardly speak. Tracks of my tears slipped away, I am weak. As I sing this last melody, set your own rest. Sunny song is my final request.
Oh darling, don't you cry no more, as the sun will soon shine 1,000 times. Don't you worry, dear, dark clouds will soon clear for you.
Apologies, I was on mute. Aloha and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 41st Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Hale Kuani, and today's Film for Thought discussion with the team from Crossings and director Deann Borshay Liem. I'm going to introduce the panelists and speakers in just a moment. I'm also going to introduce a member of Hawaii Council for the Humanities to speak. I'm just going to go over some housekeeping bits for today's discussion before we get started. This film is presented as part of our Film for Thought program in partnership with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities. This program is designed to bring together thought-provoking films with scholarly-led discussion. It's an amazing program. We've been presenting for over 10 years, and we're thrilled to be able to continue to present this program in partnership with the Hawaii Council for the Humanities. I just want to extend a special mahalo to Liz Soto and the entire HCH team for helping with the program this year. Also, if you are watching and joining us today from Facebook or YouTube, you can actually put your questions and comments directly into the comments field, and those will be passed straight through to the panelists to get those answered for you. So please feel free to comment anytime. Also, in addition to, I'm going to maybe try to remove my headphones. I believe there's an echo. Also, in addition to having this discussion today hosted by scholar Vernadette Gonzalez, we also have a companion essay that she has written on the film that you can find online at HIFF.org on our Film for Thought page, or also on our High Film blog. So please check that out after the discussion today. So before I introduce the Communications Director, Liz Soto from Hawaii Council for the Humanities, I'm going to give a brief introduction to our panelists and speakers today. Today with us, we have Deann Borshay Liem, who is an award-winning documentarian known for her landmark adoption films First Person Plural, In the Matter of Cha Jong-hee, and Geographies of Kinship, which was also featured as part of our Film for Thought program, as well as films that explore the legacies of the Korean War, including Memory of Forgotten War. She is the recipient of the Women, Peace, and Security Fellowship from the San Francisco Film Society for her latest work, Crossings, which just had its world premiere at HIFF just a couple of days ago. Joining Deann today, we also have Mimi Han, who's Vice President of the World YWCA, Christine Ahn, Executive Director of Women Cross DMZ, and Anne Wright from Veterans for Peace. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Liz Soto from the Hawaii Council for Humanities to introduce our scholars today who is hosting our discussion, Vernadette Gonzalez, Professor of American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa.
Mahalo nui, Anna. It's so great to be here. I'm Liz Soto. I'm the Communications Director for Hawaii Council for Humanities, which is a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We started in 1972, so we've been supporting innovative Hawaii-centered humanities program for nearly 50 years. Our mission is to connect people with ideas that enrich lives, broaden perspectives, and strengthen communities. And you can find out more about our programming at highhumanities.org. So welcome to our third Film for Thought event of 2021. The theme this year is recovering, rebuilding, and reimagining across time and space, which seems particularly relevant in this time of turmoil, transition, and potential. The documentary genre has the capacity to offer us an unflinching gaze at the complexities and nuances that firmly root us in our social political realities. Crossings reminds us that in spaces of entrenched violence, particularly, reimagining is a necessary foundation for recovery and rebuilding. And I also want to note that Aiko Yamashiro, our executive director, was able to go to the world premiere of Crossings, and she said she was deeply, deeply moved, and that the audience, the entire audience was as well. Our Film for Thought scholar, Vernadette Gonzalez, is a professor of American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa. She writes about cultures of US militarism, tourism, and wayward women. In her essay, Vernadette notes that sometimes our most powerful advocates are not those armed with guns and tanks, but rather are those with strength and resilience to imagine a world that is absent of both. I have long admired the many ways Vernadette, through her scholarship, through her advocacy, through her teaching, helps us imagine that better worlds are not only possible, but within reach. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Vernadette.
Thank you, Liz. What a lovely introduction for everybody. Good evening from Honolulu, everyone. I'm so excited to moderate this panel of amazing women on the film Crossings. I want to thank Hawaii International Film Festival and Hawaii Council for the Humanities for organizing this Film for Thought event. So let's get started because time is running. I understand that this is the first time you've all had a chance to talk together about the film itself, although some of you have continued to organize since the 2015 Peace Walk that is documented in the film. So the questions will explore both the making of the film and the sort of process and tensions and negotiations that arose, as well as the subject of the film, which continues to obviously be a really important topic today. So this is primarily for Deann and Christine, but please feel free to also jump in, Anne and Mimi. Could you talk about how the project came about, particularly the kinds of dialogue and negotiation that took place between Deann and Christine and other participants with regard to documenting the action and the expectations and hopes that you had for the film as a kind of form and a storytelling narrative, right, at the outset?
Sure. Well, Christine and I met in the San Francisco Bay Area many years ago, working in anti-war and Korea peace issues. And one day she told me that she was planning to take a group of women to North Korea and cross the DMZ into South, calling for peace. And having worked on Korea peace issues for a number of years, I recognize this as kind of, part of a long lineage of Korean Americans working for peace and reconciliation efforts. And I, of course, wanted to document it. And so immediately I said, yes, sign me up. That's how the project essentially got started. All of the women, including Christine, were incredibly generous and open about filming. They never said, don't film anything. Having access to all of the processes, all the discussions, the challenges that they faced, made a big difference in terms of being able to make a film that was compelling.
The only thing I would add is, as we began this journey to travel to North Korea in 2015, I knew this would be a moment of making history. And we obviously wanted to capture this on film. But you can imagine the way that we in the West especially view North Korea, and how important it is to be able to recount what happened from a perspective of somebody that deeply understands the issue. And Deann is somebody whose films, she has a cult following. She's so revered. She's such a masterful filmmaker and storyteller. And it just felt like she is absolutely the filmmaker to be traveling with us on this journey and seeing the film. And I should just be frank, there were many things that I wish that she didn't include that I had said, and images of me being attacked. And but it's the truth. And we had she is the filmmaker, and we would never in any way try to influence the way that she told the story.
That leads perfectly to my next question, actually. So Crossings depicts the many adaptations that took place before, during, and after the actual crossing of the DMZ. And it illuminates, as I was watching it, I was really struck exactly by the sort of rawness of a lot of the negotiations, right? Just how complex collective action of this kind can be, especially when balancing the expectations of different stakeholders, including the filmmaker, right? So I was hoping that all of you, if you could talk about the different obstacles you all faced during this period and how those obstacles and how you negotiated them shifted your perspectives and challenged you to find common ground, or maybe even let go of certain expectations that you had going into this process, and even maybe embrace alternatives that you had not imagined before?
You know, on the filming end, I think initially, you know, we had a very small filmmaking team going into China and then to North and South Korea, and our goal was really just to document everything that was happening as much as we could as they were unfolding. And of course, the key question was, you know, are the women going to be able to cross the DMZ? How, where, when? And the both logistical and political strategizing and challenges that they faced. But I think for me, later on, what became clearer to me was not only whether and how the women would cross the DMZ, but also whether and how the women would be able to cross the DMZ in their hearts and minds. And, you know, as Christine says early on in the film, it's very difficult to travel to North Korea without having preconceptions and without having a whole slew of stereotypes about what is North Korea. In the West, in the US in particular, you know, we have such little information about North Korea. And in the corporate media and in Hollywood films, we often see very one-dimensional portrayals of North Korea. So I think we bring to all of those things to everyone, brought those things, you know, with them to North Korea. And I think the key question that emerged for me in the making of the film is whether the delegation, the members of the delegation would be able to kind of see beyond those stereotypes and preconceptions and see the humanity in the North Korean people. And that actually became, even though that seems like a very small thing, you know, just to be able to see other people as human beings, that became sort of a key emotional and narrative arc, and part of the discovery of the making of the film.
If I could add, I, as a retired Army colonel and a former diplomat, was amazed first that Christine had convinced the North Korean government that she could bring 30 women from 15 countries, including 2 Nobel Peace Laureates and then an Army colonel, to North Korea. I mean, I've been to a lot of countries. I've been to Iran, I've been to Yemen, I've been to wherever, you know, and these trips are tough. And giving credit to Christine that she was able to convince the North Korean government, and then ultimately working with Mimi Han and others in South Korea, that we were able to go on into South Korea. I mean, it was a diplomatic and logistics nightmare that we came through.
Okay. Well, I cannot speak all on behalf of the South Korean women who helped to organize and prepare for this. But however, I keep smiling because it's just so many thoughts and emotions are crossing over, literally. And as you say, there's so many stakeholders have a different perspective and different way of having this woman cross DMZ. Was that it was quite a challenging. It was not just North Korean, South Korean, or global, our partners, women activists, but also within Korea, we have such a huge division. And you know that there was more than almost 500 to 1,000 demonstration going on against women cross DMZ. And then not only that, it was so many last cancellation, about 7 cancellation came within a week. Even the day before, we had cancellations. Like children choir decided not to come because it was politically very sensitive, and also they felt it was not secure enough. For example, there's so many barriers and so unpredictability, and until the last moment, just we felt like I was about to do bungee jump, like, you know, like in the edge of this cliff. And then, but one thing really gave me a hope and encouragement was that we know we had a same common ground. We were looking at the same directions for the peace. you know, I often say I like to use a lot of W's for 7 words. The woman wants word without war and weapons. Is it 7 W's, right? But it's not only a woman, just we all are aiming for, we are all seeking out for peace. That same heart, same spirit really brought us together. However, as I said, the way of we perceptions, opinions, the way we sees it, or even prioritizing what is more important was definitely very difficult to bring that together. But still, I think it was every moment was worth it.
I mean, there's so many things I want to say, but I guess for me, as one of the lead organizers in this, is I mean, gosh, I would say there were 2 things that really was profound for me. One is just how much trauma and division there still is on this very issue. I mean, it is a 70-year war. It is the US's longest war. All we've seen about North Korea is goose-stepping, soldiers, you know, nuclear missile tests. We don't ever see a humanized vision of North Korea or the people. And so somehow, I don't know, I thought that we would be able to cut through it. But then you're faced with a military industrial complex of an entire academic think tank media complex of mostly men, mostly white men, retired generals that want to maintain the status quo, that that benefit personally, profit from maintaining war, selling missile defense systems, selling weapons of war and destruction. And those are really powerful forces. And so you face that with so much, when you deal with an issue like foreign policy and national security and war, like that is so gendered. It is like the domain of men. And for us to take this kind of bold action to say, wait a minute, this is insanity, that 70 years of war still exists, that the war is not something from the past, that it exists today, it impacts millions of North Korean children, women, elderly people because of sanctions. They can't export textiles because of sanctions. They can't have access to medicine and scalpels to conduct surgery because of metal. I mean, this is a war that still exists. It still divides millions of families, and it still impacts us here in Hawaii, where we saw the false missile alert and how we invest so much in the Pentagon versus in schools, in healthcare, in things that actually make us secure. So it was just so profound. And somehow I thought, oh, I'm a US citizen and I'm like immune from it. And as many will see in the film, it's like, I'm not. And in fact, because I'm a small, petite Asian woman, how dare I speak up? How dare I use my voice, use my power as an ordinary citizen, a global citizen, to try to transform this 70-year war. And yeah, it is painful, but I think that's why this film is so powerful, because it actually shows ordinary people and women doing something extraordinary. And that is part of a long legacy of peace and reunification activists that have done so much to try to bring closure to this war.
Thank you for those wonderful responses. One of the things that struck me about the film was the sort of determination that it had, right, to grapple with stereotypes, the kind of baggage that we bring with us, no matter who we are, how educated or well-meaning we might be about other people in other places. Could you all talk about the experience of how that going to North Korea and encountering, and in the film, it's very staged, right? The sort of encounters that you had with some of the, with North Korean people, and especially North Korean women, hearing their voices and testimonials about the war, how all those different kinds of encounters shifted your understanding about the landscape that, you know, that exists in the peninsula. And I'm also wondering, do you think they came to view you differently over the course of the filming and the course of the peace walk?
I think that what was interesting is that the North Koreans, I feel, have a keen awareness of how they are portrayed in the Western media. And so they're very cautious, I think, about being filmed. I mean, we as a crew had no limitations. I mean, they didn't tell us not to film certain things. So we had good access there. But I know that there's a lot of caution. And the way that they do present themselves, for example, the children in the kindergarten, is very kind of coordinated and I guess choreographed to some degree. But I also feel like in the West, we tend to privilege spontaneity and think that spontaneity is authenticity. And, I really believe that, for example, in the symposium with the North Korean women, when they were telling us stories about their experiences of the Korean War, I think some viewers might view that as propaganda, that these women are just, speaking propaganda rather than speaking their authentic experiences. But, I've interviewed a number of, for various projects, I've interviewed Korean survivors of the Korean War. And what the North Korean women were sharing, I felt was very much in keeping with what the interviews that I've, conducted with Korean war survivors in the South and in the United States. And so I feel like that's a very complicated question about representation and authenticity. I think at some point we need to be able to take what people say and accept it and go from there. I tell the story about as we were editing, there's a segment that I saw of John Bolton when he was the UN ambassador, where and I can't remember what network it was, but he says, how do you know the North Koreans are lying? Their lips move. And so if you take as a basis that everything any North Korean says is a lie, then how do we move forward from there? So it's complicated. It's a complicated set of questions. I feel like the film doesn't necessarily answer those questions, but it gives us various things to consider and think about. Oh, in terms of whether the North Korean women, if I could just quickly say, we didn't have an opportunity it's one of my regrets is that I didn't have an opportunity because of our schedule to interview the North Korean organizers. So we had Mimi and the South Korean women interviews in the film, but I wanted to also have the North Korean women represented. And I had always intended to go back and interview them, but by the time I had the resources, Trump was in office, and then there was a travel ban, and I couldn't go back to North Korea to interview them. So, those voices aren't included in the film. However, I feel like with the, we interviewed 2 North Korean translators, 2 young women, and one of the women, Kim Bo-mi, talks about how her own perception of working with doing translations during the visit of the 2015 delegates, that she was surprised that most of the women were from America. And that was just startling to her, because she had always thought, people versus people, governments against governments, and that she was starting to think differently about that. And I thought that was interesting. I think it's hard for me to know, and maybe Anne or Christine, you might have different perceptions of this, but I do feel like that there were shifting viewpoints on the part of the North Korean women themselves. How could there not be? Actually, these were, human exchanges that were happening over very intense days. So I think that's an interesting component that we need to learn more about.
If I could just add, part of our delegation was chosen, members of our delegation were chosen because they came from conflict countries, from places there have been war, that they as women have suffered through wars. And to have our North Korean women tell us about the Korean War, which was 70 years before, but the rawness of it really came through. And as we learn more of the history and about the decimation, the destruction that the U.S. caused, during that 3-year war. You know, the sympathy that you have for these women that 70 years later, I mean, it was every detail they could remember. And the woman whose both hands had been shot off by U.S. Servicemen, and thinking of her having lived all those years without any hands, and the tears that were coming from everyone as these stories were told, and the stories of our women from Liberia that were telling about the Civil War there, or from Northern Ireland about the Civil War there, or it really made a common cause of women against wars in that symposium. Thank you.
Christine or Mimi, did you want to add anything?
I mean, you know, you learn so much just from being together. I mean, I went to North Korea 3 times before the crossing, before the actual trip, and every one of those meetings were difficult, and I learned things, they learned things. For example, we were having dinner with Harrison Kim after the premiere the other night, and he's a North Korea scholar, and he was like, oh, there was no images of you guys going to Mansu Day, which is the famous like bronze statues of the founder, leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un. And he was like, how come there was no? I was like, oh, well, because we negotiated that we wouldn't go there because it was too problematic. And I explained, well, we're a group of feminists. There's just no way that we would go. And I thought it was so clever that we negotiated instead a historical place, which was the birthplace of Kim Il-sung. But, you know, that is inflammatory too. And again, like, you know, anything that you say is going to be used because we're in a state of war. And so the US will use whatever they want. South Korea will use what they want, North Korea. So, you know, we're unfortunately going to face that from all sides. And I think what Anne says, which is, but we are united as women in common cause, that this is a devastating, wasteful war. And we want a different kind of future. And unless we meet, unless we see each other face to face, we actually sit in circle, shed tears together, nothing is going to change. And unfortunately, like I've also wanted to go back to North Korea too, since our crossing in 2015, but Trump instituted a travel ban on Americans from going in 2017. And so in many ways, you know, that is the hard work. But I would love to hear from Mimi because of the travel ban, we've had to go to other places like to Indonesia or to Cambodia or to China to meet with North Korean women. And Mimi was on one of the delegations where we brought women from Northeast Asia together in 2018 to meet. And so I'd love to hear Mimi's perspective also about meeting North Korean women in Beijing.
Unfortunately, South Korean women could not walk at 2015. And actually it was looking at our sisters from all over the world walking through this DMZ, I actually had 2 thoughts and 2 emotions came. And I was grateful and really appreciate our solidarity and our dedication for this peace in Korean Peninsula. But same time, I'll be honest, I was envy that I couldn't be that part of that. Especially my mother is from Pyongyang. My grandmother never returned to her home and of course passed away. So it always has been my many Koreans in Korea, South Korea has the same heart. When I went to Beijing and be able to meet our sisters from North Korea, it was, there was a moment very sensitive issue came out. However, that political perspective and differences it did not stop our trust and the solidarity. And that was, for me, it was amazing, evident, in a way, kind of like solid proof that when we meet and when we really trust each other, that is possible. That little preview of this crossing had a very sensitive part of that movie that North Korean representative had to, literally they must express it for their survival reasons, because it's so sensitive. If they don't say anything about it, they will be literally very danger in their, status. However, they were willing to open and hear our side. And then later on, we cried. We cried together. We hugged together. And I remember being apologizing. I am so sorry for that we have the division within even South Korea, that we have this demonstration, that we cannot be fully welcome this peace, and there's so much more to do. But I still do believe that hope, that we are going every time, even one step by step, we are going forward to that peace. So, that was just a wonderful experience that I can never forget. Yes.
Thanks for that answer, Mimi. Before I move on to the next question, I want to remind folks who are watching that you can ask questions of the panelists using the comments function on Facebook and YouTube. So make sure that you do send your questions in, because we can address them live. So moving from Mimi's discussion about the difficulties, right? I wanted to kind of touch on how the film ends with some footage of the continuing work, right, around the peace treaty, working towards a peace treaty, even through the Trump administration and to today, right? So I'm wondering if you could speak to what's happening now, right? And from different perspectives, could you talk about the current efforts and strategies of the Women Crossing DMZ group, as well as the efforts of South Korean women's groups? What are the prospects for peace today? So, and also, how could people get involved if they're interested?
Well, I could kick us off. The last part of the film is actually my favorite. To just see the diversity, the multi-generational, the beautiful, diverse voices and people that are part of this movement. So in 2019, we launched a campaign called Korea Peace Now. And Mimi's organization, YWCA, is one of the core partners of that campaign. Which is in South Korea, it's the Korean Women's Movement for Peace, which is a coalition of 4 organizations. And Mimi can talk about their extraordinary work in South Korea. But we really, it's Women Cross DMZ, it's WILPF, the oldest women's peace organization. The Nobel Women's Initiative joined in 2019. They're based in Canada, and then the South Korean women. And it's a global campaign. But a lot of us are putting energy in the United States. And that is because the US is a signatory to the Armistice Agreement. It's not just between North and South Korea, but the US and the UN Command, which is led by the US forces in Korea, still has operational control over South Korea's military. And we have a responsibility. We still have 30,000 US troops across 80 bases in South Korea. And, as Gloria Steinem said in the film, the U.S. played a heavy role in the fighting in the Korean War, in the division of Korea. And so we have a responsibility to play. And so we've been building this grassroots movement. There's a Korea Peace Now chapter here in Hawaii. Ann Wright is one of the co-chairs of it. And we have a congressional bill in Congress called House Resolution 3446. Introduced by Brad Sherman. And I'm proud to announce that Rep. Kai Kahele is a co-sponsor of that bill, which means a lot as a former serviceman who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that knows the cost of war, to take a proactive diplomatic stance towards a peace agreement. And so people should join our campaign and our movement. You can go to koreapeacenow.org. You could follow us at Korea Peace Now. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, Facebook. And, I think it's an extraordinary example of a citizens, people-powered grassroots movement really trying to transform U.S. foreign policy and end America's endless war in Korea.
if I could just add, we want to have events here in the Honolulu area. We want to have other showings of crossings. We want to work with the universities here to give the perspective of what peace on the Korean Peninsula really means to not only the Koreans, who are directly affected, but also us as U.S. citizens, part of a country that has been a key part of prolonging the war, prolonging a lack of peace. Some of the things that we've also done are bringing South Korean parliamentarians to our own U.S. Congress to talk to our congressmen and women about the importance of the United States not standing in the way of peace. So it's a very dynamic group. We've met with, usually we have at least one delegation that's going to South Korea every year. And we've tried to go to North Korea except for this travel ban, but we have met North Koreans in Bali, in Indonesia, and that was in early 2016. And I will say with that meeting, we were meeting women who had never been out of North Korea. 2 of them had, 4 of them had not. So, having the ability to talk with these women about what their lives are like, the differences that they see as, traveling to Indonesia, to getting to know them better, to know more about their families, and they know about our families. It really is an important aspect of our international relations. And, it hasn't been the history that North Koreans have not been able to come to the United States. It's only more recently that we've not been able to really invite North Koreans to come here. So we are working on a variety of levels to open up the space for dialogue, for peace, and treating people with respect and humanity.
Thanks. Since I kind of want to highlight the 2015's Walking a Woman Cross DMZ. Actually, this year is a 30th anniversary of the woman from North and South and Japanese woman actually walk for the first time as a civilian to walk across the DMZ in 1991. And a lot of, So obviously this year, our women organizations and associations really trying to bring that and remember her story in this Korean Peninsula. And it's we've been quite busy having this summits and then, the symposiums and a lot of different things to really reiterate our history in the woman's perspective. However, and then also after 2015, really brought us that back momentum and then really inspired again and to remind us of that to 1991 and to continue 2016, 2017, 2018, the WPW was a woman peace walk. We continue to that legacy to do that. And after that, Corona came, and then after that, we kind of stopped. But we are still working on this, not only physically walking, but truly preparing that path to this another crossing DMZ in many ways. As Christine told, we have Korea Peace Appeal campaign, but also together we also have a Korea Peace Now campaign, but also in Korea, probably this is a part of the biggest networking. Over 400 civil societies got together, including conservative and liberal, got together, and we are doing campaign again for the declaring the end of the Korean War, and until the 2023, which is the 70th anniversary of the armistice. So right now we are aiming for 1 million people participating. We are having about 10,000 ecumenical platform as another partner that I work closely with are helping to do that, to mobilize. So we are doing many different, as Anne said, different levels and different layers of the women are really participating. One thing I'm very proud to say is that through this, after Women Cross DMZ, our network for the KWNP, which is a Korean Women Movement for Peace, which is about 4 biggest and longest history organizations, women organizations are having this network for the peace building. And we actually suggested for the ambassador for the gender equality, which never had. And that came through. So that's something definitely making quite a difference, visually difference in the policy making too. So something very proud, and we did it together. So thank you for that.
It's fantastic. So this is another question for everybody, and it kind of dovetails on what Mimi was just saying about having a representative for gender equality and the importance of thinking about gender as central, right, to this kind of work. What were some of the important lessons you all learned in the process of making the film and of doing this kind of anti-war organizing, right? Because it is so centered around women's voices and women's experiences and action. And so I'm asking this question particularly thinking about you all as feminists working against war and toward demilitarization across borders, right? And how hard that work is, because sometimes I think when we do transnational feminist work, it can come across as like sort of a savior complex. So what were those lessons, right, of doing this kind of work that that you learned from each other as women from different localities? And using also different kinds of modes, from filmmaking to activism, right, to do that kind of work.
Well, in terms of the film, I feel like the film is kind of a case study of a group of very diverse international women coming together to work on a common issue. And how challenging it is to work across international borders, across race, across cultural differences, across even different understandings of the Korean conflict, different levels of understanding of the history of the conflict. And I think what struck me in observing and documenting the whole process is the women's commitment to learning and to working through difference. And I think there was an understanding of wanting to avoid feminist imperialism and perpetuating white saviorism. And I think all of the women were very experienced working in their respective areas. And so these issues and concerns weren't new. But I think I was really impressed with, in some ways, the women being vulnerable about what they didn't know and being willing to acknowledge it and being willing to grow from that. And, as you saw in the film, there were disagreements and different possibilities for strategies. But in the end, the women decided on a common goal, which was to stick together and cross together. And I think that was a very moving thing to witness and to document.
Gosh, there's so much to say about the lessons. One is for sure that we have to think about the Korean women and the impact that our activism has on their lives. And that is so ever clear to me. Yet, and I think as feminist peace builders, that's like a golden rule. It's a principle, right? You have to center the voices of those most impacted. But how do you lift up the voices of North Korean women when you can't really meet with them, when you can't really talk to them? And then you layer into that the United States is still an aggressor nation. It is still the obstacle. And actually, I mean, you saw it so clearly, actually, in 2018, when the leaders of North and South Korea met at Panmunjom. It was, available for the whole world to see, Kim Jong-un shaking hands with Moon Jae-in, signing the Panmunjom Declaration, saying we're going to transform Korea from a land of war to one of peace. And then there was another summit, and who blocked it? It was John Bolton. But even though Trump met Kim, the U.S. policy never fundamentally shifted. We still have the same stance of maximum pressure in the form of sanctions, military exercises, political isolating North Korea. So the North Koreans feel like, what's changed? Yes, we've had these summits, but nothing has fundamentally changed. And so that's where it's complicated, because you want to center the voices of Korean women. You want to empower them. But if they can't meet, if they can't cross the DMZ, then that is where there is a role. There is a responsibility, especially for those of us in the United States, to help bring closure to this war. And so that's where I, am constantly having self-reflection and self-criticism. I don't know how to do this in the most just and righteous way. And I hopefully keep growing and learning, but I know I've made tons of mistakes. I know that I'm imperfect. I know that I can and must do more, especially to empower my sisters in South and North Korea. But I also know the responsibility that we have in the United States. And so that's where I put a lot of my energy, is we have to change Washington, because unless Washington is part of a peace agreement, that war will languish on.
If I could just mention also, as Christine referenced earlier in the program, there are a lot of people that really don't want peace, and the knives are out for those who are trying to go after it, and trying to be a voice of sanity and reason in an insane warmongering world is a real challenge. And when you say, well, we ought to talk to the North Koreans, we ought to talk to this group, we ought to talk to that group, rather than killing them, which seems to be the way the United States actually does go after a lot of countries. It's dialogue's thrown out the window and we kill them. So this effort to try to end a confrontation of 70 years is a tough one. But I'm so proud to be a part of Women Cross DMZ and the Korea Peace Network and all, because we are doing something and we are making a difference, and we are having influence on the U.S. Congress. We're having influence for our South Korean women who are after their parliament all the time. So it's really worth it, and we've got to keep it up. And we want everyone to join us, please. And Crossings is a great movie to watch because it really explains all of this.
That's really true, actually. So, Mimi, did you want to add anything?
Yes. The question about what did I learn lessons from that, it was that it's not learning new lesson. I think it's more confirming lessons that I learned before. As a feminist and also as a woman activist, my definition of working as a feminist peace movement is sharing power. Sharing power. It's not just top to bottom or to horizontal, but really sharing power together. It may take a lot of more patience. It may take some time, but really open, embrace and embracive leadership, not just inclusive leadership. That's something that I do believe in our women as activists. But also, I think one thing I really appreciate about our feminist perspective, looking at the peace building, is that I really like this word, preemptive. We don't do preemptive strike. We do preemptive love. Yeah, I really do. I actually know one of the organization has actually named preemptive love. He works, one of the strong activists, the peace activists, both couples are in Syria. And when I met him, and then when I heard this, it really struck me. That's what we women always has been. We never do preemptive strike as always negative when we say preemptive, but we do it preemptively with love. We truly believe that's what women are the best at. And then, this is what we've been doing, preemptive love. And we will continue to do that. And so please join watching this movie and then crossing, and then let's do this preemptive love for this, peace for the world and also to the Korean Peninsula.
I can't top that. I think we should just end there because that pretty much wraps up the sort of power of like what is exactly powering the kind of work that is happening in the Korean Peninsula across borders to build peace, right? So I think Anna is going to close us up at this point. Thank you so much, Deann, Christine, Anne, and Mimi for sharing your wisdom and your words with us this evening. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for that incredible discussion. I feel so inspired right now. I felt inspired watching the film, and I feel even more inspired after that discussion. And you're all such amazing, amazing women. We're so grateful to have you here for this discussion today. So again, just a huge mahalo to Deann, Christine, and Mimi for joining us, and to Vernadette for moderating this discussion today. And also, of course, to Hawaii Council for the Humanities, our incredible partner in presenting this program. I do want to remind everybody that beginning today, Crossings is available to watch on our HIFF streaming site, watch.hiff.org. You can watch that anytime between now and the 28th of November on the streaming service. And you can find out more information about how to get tickets at hiff.org by searching for the Crossings film listing. Also, if you are really loving our Film for Thought program and discussions, we will be back on Wednesday with our next Film for Thought conversation for the film Karma Link with director Jake Washtel. Also, please check out any of our other Film for Thought films, which are also streaming on demand until November 28th. Thank you all so much again for joining us. Thank you, audience, for joining us today. This will be up on our Facebook and YouTube pages, so you can share this conversation afterward today. And you can also tell your friends and family to go to HIF's Facebook page or YouTube to watch the conversation. Thank you all so much. Mahalo.